Board certify by recorded vote that to the best of each board member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act
Great. I guess now I call this meeting to order. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will now observe a moment of silence. And I will now ask, do any board members have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move we approve tonight's agenda.
A second.
And actually, I don't think we need a roll call. Ayes?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Next up will be Agenda Item 4.0, which is approval of the consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Do we have any discussion? I do have one small point of discussion, which is just, I know there was some email confusion about the SEAC response, and I don't think typically we do that for action. I know that's a very minor change, but that to me seems like a for information piece, which I'm glad you provided that information. I don't think we need to approve it as, I personally don't think we need to approve it as a statement back to them.
I think the issue, the way, we didn't mean it for action, I think this is just a transition thing, but everything on the consent agenda, you can only choose action, but we had gotten into the habit of putting in it, this is just for information, so thank you for bringing that up. We'll do that,
Okay, with that additional knowledge, and then I don't have any other discussion.
I actually just, if I may, I wasn't at the last meeting, so I was not able to hear the discussion around the calendar. I just did want to note that we got some feedback, I got some feedback after last meeting about it, and, I recognize that we just have to really work with the resources that we have in terms of time, and that's like the most finite resource, really. So I guess want to acknowledge that, and we've had to balance a lot of things for this calendar.
Thank you for those comments, Ms. Lee. Any other discussion? Can we have a roll call vote? I think I'm going to start moving away from roll call vote, though. I don't think we need them for all of this. We can just do ayes for consent agenda?
Aye.
Nays? Okay. So next up on the agenda, which I accidentally got out of, is public comment. And Ms. Lee, Vice Chair Lee, will be taking over for that.
Did you want to have everybody
Introduce ourselves?
Oh, I'm sorry. I know you also. I don't introduce you. And I've heard my voice sounds very similar to yours, Ellen, so I guess we have to distinguish ourselves. So we have, over here on our right, we have Mr. Ross Holden, who's a school board attorney. Ross, you can do a mic check.
Ross Holden, School Board Attorney.
And if we could just go around, I feel like that's more efficient.
Dr. Rebecca Berlin, Whitehall District.
John O.L. Caro at large.
Kate Acuff, Jack Jewett District.
Judy Lee, Rivanna District.
Katrina Carlson, Rio District.
Graham Page, Samuel Miller District.
Ellen Osborne, Scottsville District.
Sanuthi Amar Singha, Student Representative.
And then we have Christine Thompson, our interim school board clerk. Would you like to say your name for the mic check?
Christine Thompson.
Thank you. Dr. Haas stepped up. Next up then will be public comment.
Thank you, Chair Carlson. We invite and actively seek the public's input in matters relevant to school board governance and provide time in our business meetings to hear from our residents and community members. During public comment, we expect respectful and on-topic comments. Disruptive behavior from speakers or from members of the public in attendance will not be tolerated. Anyone who willfully disrupts the meeting in a manner that prevents or interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting may be ejected by the chair. Individuals and/or organizations wishing to speak during public comment must sign in with the clerk. Sign-up is available beginning at 9 a.m. on the Monday of the meeting week until 3:30 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Public testimony guidelines are as follows. Speakers should state name and address or voting district, address comments to the school board as a whole, limit comments to those matters that are relevant to school board governance or school division operations, give written statements or other supporting materials to the clerk. If you're unable to complete the presentation in the time allotted, a copy of supporting materials will be provided to school board members. 3 minutes will be allowed for each presenter to speak. A color-coded system is used to time presentations. The yellow light means the speaker is 2 minutes into the presentation, and the red light means the speaker is at the 3-minute limit and must wrap up. In order to maintain respect for all points of view, the school board requests no clapping, booing, or any other audible form of support or non-support be used. If members of the public wish to show their support for a speaker, they may stand and raise their hands. Debate and dialogue with the school board is not allowed. So tonight we have 2 speakers. Our first one is Amanda Alger via Zoom, and then our second one is Caden Wright, who I see in the audience tonight. Hi, Amanda, you can go ahead whenever you're ready.
She did not hear that.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Amanda Alger. I'm a resident of the Rio District. I have 3 children who have grown up in ACPS schools. My youngest didn't learn to read as easily as his older sisters. Reading with him in the 3rd grade, I knew something was different and did not know where to turn for help, as he was not identified as needing any school interventions. Thankfully, my pediatrician warned me that this was the red flag, that 3rd grade marks the transition from teaching kids to read to reading to learn. If a student is not on target at this point, many students never catch up. I'm lucky to have a generous friend who is a UVA reading expert who helped us. And jumping to the end of my personal story, my 6th grader is now a thriving reader. Here is what my family learned in this process. Turns out the reading assessment ACPS is using isn't great. My friend assessed my son with dibbles, and he actually had very poor word decoding skills. But his well-intentioned teacher missed this deficiency. For my son, like many kids, the answer was explicit phonics instruction, a science of reading-based approach long established as superior to the whole language, balanced literacy approach used for years by ACPS. Teachers have been transitioning to this approach, but right now there are way too many students, like my son, who were left behind in elementary school and need high-quality intervention during the school day. Our classroom teachers are amazing, but many just don't yet understand the science of reading and how to apply it to the overwhelming number of kids who are struggling in every single classroom. I spent an insane amount of money over the pandemic to have a tutor work with him, and the results were like magic. Suddenly he was reading Percy Jackson and his other favorite books with ease. That left me feeling let down by ACPS and angry for the families that don't have the resources to pay for the outside tutoring that we did. I'm also a middle school substitute teacher and am frequently asked to read basic content aloud to struggling readers. At a recent parent council meeting, we were shown the intervention data that you will see tonight. I was alarmed to see high numbers of kids identified, but very few interventionists funded. I asked the school board, as you plan for next year's budget, Invest in hiring additional reading specialists for both middle and high school. It is not okay for ACPS to leave these kids behind. Train teachers in high-quality assessment like DIBELS. As bad as the numbers of students look, I know personally that there are so many more kids out there who are not identified and really struggling. And finally, put money aside to fix the problems that are sure to be surfaced in the audit that you have funded. The issues that I am describing impact all kids and families, but disproportionately impact kids and families who are Black, brown, or have limited financial resources. It is wrong to continue to rely on wealthy families to pay tutors and leave everyone else with an instructional system that is clearly not working. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Amanda. Next, we have Caden Wright.
Hi, I'm Caden Wright. I'm a sophomore at Albemarle High School and a student at Monticello High School. I'm here to ask the board to prioritize effective equity in its actions. During the past few weeks, I've been told that it's happening in the bathrooms. I've been told that problems in my school and in others are severe and that they need to be solved quickly. I've heard about plans to hire school resource officers, plans to increase staffing, even plans to gut out entire bathrooms to ensure that our schools remain safe. See, I find that odd because school security has been an issue for me and for others for years now. You and I both know that it just hasn't been happening in the bathrooms. The problems in the school district are a result of what's been happening in the classrooms and in the front offices and what's been happening here. Personally, I've spoken in front of dozens of committee members, district administrators, parents about school safety, about my issues. And do you know, I've heard back, we're working on it. We're aware of the issue. But the reality is that the work we've done isn't acceptable, and that school safety is still unacceptable throughout Albemarle County. And many students, teachers, and parents still worry about coming to school or sending their kids to school. Goal 3, equitable and transformative resources, states that ACPS will distribute all resources in an equitable manner to transform learning experiences and opportunities. Can you confidently say that you've succeeded in meeting your own strategic plan when it comes to school safety? Can you confidently say that ACPS is on track to meet this goal? You can't succeed without us. You can't meet your strategic plan without us. Your teachers, your students, your community members, we all want to help you. But when you shut us out by calling us liars or exaggerators in press releases, by denying communicative solutions, like collective bargaining, or by covering up incidents and failing to report violations by hiring additional police officers to patrol previous board meetings, you jade us, you anger us, and you make the problem worse. We want to help you, you need our help, and you should work with us instead of against us to solve school security.
Thank you for those comments, Caden. And I see the gavel, I guess, whatever, the meeting back to you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for those comments, or the two of you. And now we will be moving to announcements, which I believe there are a few announcements.
So I did want to ask is Ms. Schmidt there, to come up and talk about the new hotline for local government. She wanted to give you an update on that.
Good evening. I'm Rosalind Schmidt, Chief Operating Officer, and I just want to provide an update on an action recently taken by the Board of Supervisors earlier this month. So the county's Department of Finance and Budget is launching a fraud, waste, and abuse reporting system, which is a one-stop shop where people can anonymously report any fraud, waste, and abuse issues they've observed in the county. As you know, Albemarle County has a unique form of government in that we are the county's finance. The school's finances are under their umbrella. So what this means in this instance is that system would also be a reporting tool for financial matters in the school division. So just a couple notes about this. It was not created because fraud was suspected. That's the number one question. But rather, this is best practice by GFOA, which stands for the Government Finance Officers Association, which is the authority of government financial management. The county is utilizing a third party to administer the reporting website and to ensure anonymity of the reporting individual. Staff or members of the public can utilize the system. They're going to begin to publicize it shortly, and it will go live next month. Any questions on that?
Will it be live in time for our budget sessions?
Yes.
Do you know how we'll address people with multiple languages?
The website is available in multiple languages, yes.
I'm glad you mentioned it's verified anonymous. I remember when I was a teacher and my supervisor said, fill out this anonymous survey about your supervisor, and it was just me. I was like, I don't think that's the way it works. So that's good to know.
Thank you,
All
Rosalind.
right, thank you.
I want to just give a shout out to Dr. Daphne Kaiser around the community engagement program last night. They hosted a community information session around about special education, and then also about Albemarle County Schools special education programs. I don't know if any board members had a chance to attend it, but they had local experts from our own school system, as well as staff from TTAC at JMU, and also from UVA. And it was a really well-attended and excellent program. I really appreciate it. Thank you. On Monday, we hosted a strategy exchange that it was a long time in the making. We had a visit from leadership staff from Hanover, York, and Roanoke County schools. We identified those school systems as similar to our demographics and size and geography, and also outperforming us on the SOL test for across demographic groups. And so I reached out to them a couple of months ago now and asked the superintendents would they come and tell us what they're doing, help share their strategies with us. I also invited the Charlottesville City Schools to attend. So we had in the ballpark of 90 participants, and I know Dr. Acuff was there, and I didn't know if Dr. Acuff had any thoughts about the day.
First of all, I'd like a shout out to Megan Wood, who put it together. It was well organized, and I thought it was very good. I mean, I thought it was good in emphasizing that we are very serious about closing the achievement gap, and we are not too proud to ask other school divisions who have better scores than we do. Are there secrets? I'm certain there's no magic bullet, I have to say. But I think that there were approaches that we can use and adapt here. I'm very interested in seeing sort of the after-action plan. I mean, there was beginning comments, and then we broke up into tables and that had representatives from the various school divisions. And it was, I think, perhaps a first step in maybe a series of these meetings, because I thought it was very good.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it went so well. It really is something to do every year, and there were different themes in the conference where you could choose different tables around instructional leadership or intervention. So as those different themes, I think, emerge over the years, and as we get better and better at what we do, we'll just keep trying to reach higher and higher in terms of other school systems that we can talk to about the work. I also want to thank Dan Redding and Dr. Claire Kaiser for all the work they did to put together the first Employee Voice and Action Committee meeting on Monday. I want to thank all the teachers, all the employees, all the various staff for attending the meeting and helping us get it off the ground. We did have a couple of board members there. I know that Dr. Berlin and Ms. Osborne were there as well, so I don't know if you had anything you wanted to share about the meeting.
I just thought our employees seemed to be really engaged, and I appreciate their efforts to talk about things and to participate in a lot of the activities, Mr. Redding and
Bob Garrett.
and Bob Garrity had for us. So I look forward to more progress on that.
And then the only thing I would add is the group spent time really talking about how to be an effective listener, how to think outside the box. So not just digging into the issues from the beginning, but spending time bringing their voices together and learning together so that going forward they can work on the important working environment issues that they all face.
Yeah, I thought it was great. The thing I noticed too was, as the meeting went along, the employees really, their voices, more and more conversations among employees. Kristen Kress is here tonight, I noticed. She was an employee that was offering ideas about how they could make decisions together. And it really turned into quite a conversation. And I seldomly go to a meeting where the participants say, well, we're supposed to meet a month from now, but that's not soon enough. We want to meet again in 2 weeks. And so we're trying to figure out how do we accelerate the meeting process. And I would love to meet with that group every 2 weeks to hear their voices and to continue to make improvements to the system based on what we hear from really the key stakeholders in our work. The last thing I want to mention, speaking of listening, is I did have another listening stop yesterday at Journey Middle School. So I got to meet with several staff there in the afternoon and hear about what they think's going well in Albemarle County schools, the challenges that we have, the things that can get better, as well as their ideas for solutions. And as we listen, we are working on posting those on the superintendent's webpage. The things that we're hearing from our different constituency groups. My next visit will be at Monticello High School to meet with families. We have kind of a tentative date for that, but I'm going to try and pick a date where there's already something going on for families so that I can hop on to that, because I don't know how popular my listening tour will be as opposed to something else going on. But I do want to give a shout out to Deneen Lilly. She's a science teacher at Journey Middle School, been there for a really long time, always changing, always adapting to work with the students. And she used this expression that I think was just wonderful. And it speaks to working with middle school students, but she said she doesn't call tests, she calls them celebrations of learning. And yeah, I mean, everybody reacted the same way, and I imagine her students react the same way too, because really that's what it's all about. An opportunity for students to show you what they know. We often think of tests as a way to sort and select and figure out what kids don't know so they can get extra help, but students learn a lot of what teachers teach, but they also learn a lot of unintended curriculum because of the way they process what they learn and make it their own. So assessments should be an opportunity for students to show what they learned and to celebrate that and to consolidate what they know. And she gets it, and I think, many of our, teachers do, and she exemplifies that way of thinking. So thank you, Deneen. And I think that's all I have, right? Okay, thank you.
I have one more thing. This week was the first meeting of 2023 of ACES, which is the Advisory Committee on Environmental Sustainability that this board launched a year ago. It has the overarching goal of environmental sustainability, but working within the umbrella of the county's climate action plan, and we work in areas of transportation, building, landscaping, grounds, and education. How can we educate our students about what's going on? How can we we talked a bit about even mowing patterns and having natural and wild areas on the properties, but given that we have at least 3 schools going to be built in the next 10 years, talking about what kind of standards we're going to look to, looking at our electric buses and financing of it. Anyone is welcome to listen into the meetings, and Ms. Carlson was there as a liaison as well. We have both county and representatives and appointees by the several members of this board, as well as the superintendent.
It was a wonderful meeting.
You
Well, I do, and this is somewhat of an emotional announcement. As we're all aware, and many people are aware, on December 18th, our school board clerk of 20-plus years suddenly passed. And in keeping with her family's wishes, in the last week, school board members and our school board attorney gave personal monies, and they were presented to the First Christian Church, which was a very important place in Jennifer's life, and the amount of $1,000. And we continue to miss her, and we thank Ms. Thompson for the wonderful job that she's doing to fill in. Thank you.
Again, this is a bit older because I missed the last meeting, but I just really wanted to thank Dr. Daphne Kaiser and Dr. Irizarry and Ms. Lauren Hunt for working with me on a magisterial meeting at the beginning of January. There were a lot of positive things, actually, that came out of that meeting that I and the people who went to it know about. Parents and teachers talked about how much the students are cared for, how happy they are to be in the buildings, and I'm sorry that that message hasn't gotten out, but I heard it, and I definitely heard all the rest of the messages too, so I just wanted to thank all the members of central office who helped me be able to do that.
So I believe that concludes, thank you, everyone. I believe that concludes announcements and school board superintendent business. And with that, we will move into our school board work session, which is on tiered supports for Albemarle County Public Schools.
Good evening. Just a little better. I'm Debbie Collins, Deputy Superintendent. Tonight, our work session is focused on tiered supports for our students. By tiered supports, we mean how we approach learning and the different layers of supports we provide for our students in our schools. For well over a decade, we have provided additional supports for students who have not reached certain benchmarks. Over the past 5 years, we have pushed to provide more equitable supports across our schools. Coming out of the pandemic is offering us a chance to recalibrate and improve both our systems and our best practice in interventions. During the pandemic, most of our interventions and remediations efforts were disrupted. If you recall, for over a year, any assigned intervention staff was deployed to classrooms to allow us to bring students back into our school buildings. These interventionists became classroom teachers so we could social distance. Last year, as our year looked more normal, our interventionists shouldered the additional responsibility of some days being substitutes. Even this year, in some schools, that continues. This year, we have moved to systemize the supports across our schools. We established a director of tiered services, hired that position in July. Mr. Domer is here with us tonight. We've reorganized our intervention functions into one central grouping and tasked that group to review current state and establish next steps based on researched best practices. Okay. Our work session tonight is focused on where we are, where we want to be, and how we're moving towards our targets. In order to have thriving students, Goal 1, where all students are meeting benchmarks, we must have a dynamic system of support for our students. In order for tiered services to be effective, they must be based on research-based best practices, aligned to the curriculum and to the assessments. In order for tiered services to be effective, teachers must be provided with the materials and the professional development that they need. At this point, I'd like to introduce Mr. Domer. He's going to facilitate our work session, and we have teachers that you'll be hearing from as well. Mr. Domer.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. Good evening, members of the school board. My name is Craig Domer. I'm the Director of Instruction for Tiered Supports. I've worked in Albemarle County for about almost 20 years, I hate to say. Classroom teacher, math specialist, lead coach, assistant principal, and principal. I was excited to take this position, and I'm excited to talk to you tonight about Tiered Supports, our current state, and where we're hoping to move in the future. I went home briefly today for my daughter's birthday, and on the way out, my son told me that I looked like I was going to a sweetheart dance. I decided to let that comment lie, and I'll explain to him what a school board meeting is tomorrow. So, we have several goals for this session. Before we begin, I just want to say, in taking this position, I had kind of committed that for the first 6 months at least, I was just going to try and wrap my head around what system we currently have, how Tiered Supports looks across all the schools, and how we can make it more systemized and offer better supports to those students. In preparing for this meeting, I think, and what I've learned so far, there are opportunities that are in front of us that I'm excited to take. But tonight, as we work through our work session, we're going to try to gain a better shared language around what a multi-tiered system of supports is. We'll understand the various tiered supports that are already offered to students in our schools, and we will gain insight into the difference maybe between best practices and our current state, and we'll talk about maybe some beginning next steps to move us closer to getting the results that we want to have and to close the gaps that I know persist and I know bother everyone here tonight. Our session tonight is really broken up into 3 or 4 parts. We're going to learn a little bit about MTSS. You'll also hear about what it looks like from a division perspective. We will have some time with practitioners from the school level. Then we'll discuss next steps. So what is a multi-tiered system of supports? You may be more familiar with the terminology of response to intervention, or RTI. The last person who kind of wrapped their arms around this issue is Kevin Kirst when he was the director of special ed, kind of in 2014-15, in response really to an over-identification of special education students in Albemarle County. At the time, we were close to 20% or more were identified as special education. And so response to intervention was kind of created to try and provide students supports before we labeled them with disabilities, which is still a main goal of a multi-tiered system of supports. We have gotten much better at that, including not over-identified any particular membership groups over time. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the staffing page. Kevin was a little ahead of his time, I'll have to say. If you don't know, he has a background in social work, and so he always was layering in social, emotional, and behavioral interventions along with academic interventions. I think the rest of that field caught up to him, and so then they decided to change the name to multi-tiered system of supports when you consider more than just academics. But a lot of the things are the same, including kind of the triangle or pyramid model that some people may be familiar with. Tier 1 represents all students. It's the green triangle at the bottom and all the supports that we provide in the classroom that everyone gets. Even students who need more support, they still get the Tier 1 supports. The yellow triangle is meant to represent early intervention and kind of a healthy system. We would expect this to be 5 to 15% of our students who are getting small group interventions. And then the most intensive intervention is supposed to be saved for 1 to 5% of students, and is often talked about as Tier 3. So something to take away here is just that the supports layer on top of one another. They're not supposed to be replacements. And the majority of any student's day is in their Tier 1 classroom. No matter how much intervention or tiered support we're able to offer them, they're going to go to class. We've done a lot of work around de-leveling those classes, and we're always working to better differentiate and provide classroom instruction that will be accessible to students regardless of how much additional support they might need. I'm going to trust that this video is going to play, even though it's suddenly disappeared. Rather than have an expert come tonight, I just thought we would work around a short video and an article. Both are provided by Panorama Education. We don't have any contract with them for multi-tiered systems of support, though they do have some products which you'll hear slight commercials for. But they do provide our school climate survey, and they have done a nice job with these materials. And I chose them this evening because I thought that they talked well about best practices and some common missteps, which might better help us to kind of identify and put language around some gaps that we might be seeing in our current system and where we would like it to be. So the video is about 2.5 minutes. We'll watch it all together, and then we'll take about 8 minutes to read the article. Also, I think in front of you, you have kind of a graphic organizer that hopefully will allow you to organize your thinking as we move through the work session, and you will be able to kind of have a conversation at the end with some organized thoughts.
Hey, I'm Ryan from Panorama. In this Q&A episode, we're talking about one of my favorite topics, getting started with a multi-tiered system of supports, otherwise known as MTSS. This is one of the most common questions we hear from schools and districts who are just beginning their MTSS journeys, or even those who are a few years in and looking to improve their systems. We know it can be daunting to roll out MTSS, so I'm going to break it down into 3 pieces. First, and this may sound obvious, it's super important to set a vision and document it. Have a public written plan that shares your core beliefs, goals, and definitions around MTSS. Maybe you're focusing on MTSS as a pathway to equity, as a framework for supporting the whole child, as a way to provide proactive personalized support to every student, or all of the above. A key goal of this plan should be to ensure that staff are using shared language around MTSS. When I was a principal, I supported my staff with using student-first language to describe the observable needs and strengths of students. For example, rather than staff using deficit-based phrases like lazy student, saying this student struggles with motivation when presented with above grade level text. Or, rather than Carla needs to work on her fluency, saying Carla's reading 72 words per minute, consistently missing 2-syllable words, and the sight word was. But we know that having a clear vision isn't enough. Your plan can be flawless, but you've got to have the people to execute on it. MTSS is a team sport, and everyone in the building has a role in making it work. As leaders, we need to build human systems to weave MTSS into our school culture. It means creating central office positions that align with your strategic vision for MTSS, creating shared protocols, building time for MTSS into master schedules, and offering professional development. And at the heart of it all are strong data systems. Your support staff needs real-time access to student data to make decisions about student supports. And you've got to have data to understand if interventions are working. Think about ways to streamline intervention management. We recommend bringing your progress monitoring data across academics, behavior, attendance, and SEL into one spot, instead of having it in different systems, spreadsheets, and reports. Panorama can help you with that. Student Success brings all of your data together with intervention tracking, dashboards, and easy-to-use tools for managing intervention.
I'll stop the commercial, but yes, there's also a conversation around whether we believe Ryan was a principal. Several Albemarle County principals think that he has too much hair.
He looked pretty young.
He looked pretty young, but he spoke true. What he spoke was true about being a principal. So as I said, we're going to take about 8 minutes. I'm going to step away and I'm going to set a timer to let you dig into that article and really focus on the top 2 boxes on your graphic organizer. And then I'll come back when my phone chimes. All right, I'll do a teacher check-in. Are you good, or do you need a couple more minutes? Okay. Okay, we're going to take a little bit of a shift into kind of where we stand as a division, as we stand as a system. One of the things that we're going to work towards is kind of a common set of belief statements that we can kind of anchor any work that we do in the future around. And I will say that I've written up here a very kind of preliminary first draft of some of the talk that's been going on under division level PLC and what I've heard from teachers and from administrators as I've been visiting schools. But these will be revised kind of repeatedly as we start to create and document a manual of our system of supports. But I wanted to share with them because as I talk through the next several slides, and as my viewpoint in doing this work is kind of anchored in some of these belief statements, that all students can learn and succeed, that some students need more intensive support to reach academic goals, that the majority of a student's instruction is in their classroom, and our ability to design, differentiate, and deliver quality instruction in the classroom is still the biggest factor of a student's success. But to have a system of supports, we must be able to identify, make plans for, and track the progress of students who are in need of additional supports academically, socially, and/or behaviorally. And that support should be equitable across Albemarle County Public Schools, regardless of the school that you're in. We will provide support just in time and just enough to allow them to succeed. This chart is just a smattering, just to give you a sample of some of the tiered support that currently exist at schools. Academic, behavior, and social emotional, tier 1, 2, and 3. As you can see, most of the supports are in tier 1 because it supports most of the students. And then as it gets more intensive, that support gets more individualized, so there's less necessarily kind of offered to everyone across the board. In my time in this position, I hope to fill this chart out even further and have it be similar across all schools. This next slide, I'd say, is our biggest kind of step in preparing for this meeting, kind of, and in general. We realize it's not always easy to track the staffing that's provided to students for academic intervention at the schools. It's in the budget book in different places. A lot of it depends on differentiated staffing at a school level, and we try to track that. So I've presented this chart. A lot of this data has come from schools. It's hard for us to get it at a central level, especially the number of students, so we'll talk about that on the next slide. And it's a step to be more transparent because I think being transparent is important as we start to try and solve some of the issues that we have around this work, and to celebrate the things that are going well and to figure out why those things are occurring. I think whenever you take a step towards transparency, there can be a little bit of trepidation. We went over this. We had a DPLC day on Tuesday. The interventionists have been meeting this year on DPLC days, which has been wonderful as they've shared practice. But we went over this chart, right? And our numbers aren't right, or we have a few more kids than that. My principal didn't know, and so we've tried to keep that updated. And I said to them, and I'll say out loud to you, I'm sure that there are boxes on this chart that are not 100% correct. But this is the best data that we have, and I think we have to be able to talk about it. It also, I think, illuminates for us some of the work that we have to do between schools and across levels. Some of these staffing decisions are very site-based. Every school has a system, and every school is making the best decisions that they can. But as we move forward into this budget cycle and this cycle of staffing meetings, I do expect that we will have some more central kind of oversight and conversations about how we're making sure that there is enough staffing to provide tiered supports at each individual school. I would like to highlight a couple columns and what they mean. So everyone's enrollment, that's how many students are at the school. The free and reduced lunch percentage is there because largely that's how differentiated staffing is calculated. And so that's how much differentiated staffing an individual school would have to play with as far as lowering class size or funding extra sections based on student choice or providing academic intervention. These are the decisions principals make to staff schools all the time. Title I is our federal Title I grant. We provide staffing to those 6 elementary schools from that grant, and that is the column that is there. The Title I grant mandates that that staffing be in addition to whatever you would normally provide to those schools. So that's why it's not made up for anywhere else and on any of the other columns from division money. Intervention prevention, you'll see those 3 staffing positions at those 3 middle schools. Historically, about 2 decades ago, those middle schools were included in the Title I grant, and the decision was made to focus on early elementary intervention and prevention. The school board at that time decided to fund those 3 positions for those 3 schools, and it has gone on in perpetuity since that point. They were receiving 1 position from Title I at the time, so it was a 1-for-1 switch. The RTI funding, which I think gets a lot of questions, that RTI funding is actually part of the special ed grant. The special ed is a block grant. We actually have to provide that funding based on disproportionality of certain membership groups identified in special education. According to Mr. Kirsch, that has been going on for over a decade. We started with 5 categories of membership groups and over-identified. We are down to 1, which is Black students for intellectually disabled. And so we have to take some money out of that federal grant and set it aside for early intervention. It's not additional money out of the special ed grant, it's just a set aside because it's dollars and teacher salaries have increased. We can fund less and less teachers out of that each time, which is why over the past couple of years it has gone down a little bit, just because the number of positions that are able to be purchased, the purchasing power of that money has declined. The next column is differentiated staffing. This comes directly from principals as how much of their differentiated staffing they have used to fund intervention positions in their building. And then you have your total FTE. You can see the impact of the Title I grant as those schools have the most. And then you can see some variability kind of within each level and across the levels. The last column is total additional funds. That is money that is often used for after-school tutoring, tutoring programs, They're all kind of off numbers on the elementary side because it's largely provided by the state through PALS funding and our PALS identification rate. And the secondary schools are nice and round because it's local funding. We will stop for questions in about 3 slides. We have a program, as you started to see the Panorama commercial at the end of that video, but we do have a current program that we collect data around tiered supports. It's called Ed Insight. It's been in use in this division for 4 to 5 years. This is just a quick screen grab of part of the dashboard that's on my account when I log in from a division level. Every teacher in Albemarle County Public Schools has an Ed Insight account, but I would say it's mostly used by interventionists to track students who are getting tiered supports, to track their plans, and to enter progress monitoring data. I will say that it is a little bit clunky, and it's not a favorite of all teachers as far as its user-friendliness and usability. You'll see, just one data point to point out, on the previous slide, there were about 2,100 students that principals had identified as receiving tiered support. I believe that that number is pretty accurate. As a principal, I always had my spreadsheet. As we saw in the video, we don't want a system where every principal keeps their own spreadsheet, but every principal has their spreadsheet. And so when they say that 111 students are getting supports in their building, I believe them, that's an accurate number. But we only have 911 plans entered into Ed Insight. And so that happens largely because in a lot of our schools, especially our non-Title I schools, the Tier 2 intervention happens in the classroom. And the program is particularly unfriendly to classroom teachers, being able to take the time and enter individual plans for individual students. We'll talk about steps that we're trying to take in a little bit. John Mitchum in the Department of Technology has been extremely helpful. He and Gene Osborne, who is the assistant principal at Red Hill and a former Department of Technology employee, and I meet every other week to work on how we can make Ed Insight more user-friendly and more automated so that it does not rely on so much work from the classroom teacher, so that we can tier the students and we could get that number closer to 2,100 to match the number that are on the school spreadsheets. We also get a race breakdown kind of ongoing and updated. So you can see there that it is pretty proportional to our student population. And that's just the students who have plans, but there are 1,200 students who don't have plans at Ed Insight. I think one of our strengths, as I've started this position, is that every school has a process. And again, you can't take credit for that after 6 months. I think that is something that Mr. Kurse really focused on in 2014-15. He wrote an RTI manual. A lot of what you'll see in schools when I visit still kind of goes back to the processes and practices that started then. I believe processes endure. And so it's a pretty strong process. Professional learning communities and school-based intervention teams meet frequently, as do some school data teams to track and keep track of those students on those school spreadsheets. Meetings occur with the parents of students who are in receiving intervention and having tiered supports, and progress is tracked. That's what I have to share from a division level perspective. And in order to kind of, when we move to the next section, and we're going to have 3 kind of rotating sessions with teachers, I want you to focus on the school level with them. So we're going to pause for division level questions I'm happy to take at this time.
How does this work past middle school?
Past middle school and high school.
What happens in high school?
I would say a great question. High school, we probably have a little bit more, I think we probably have the most variability in high school. And we're having probably the hardest time tracking the data because high schools have different systems and different ways to support students. A lot of it is different class enrollments. They all have some kind of intervention period, whether it be Mustang morning or Patriot period. And Western Albemarle is going out of my brain, but I love Western Albemarle High School, so it's Warrior period, thank you, Ms. White.
Oh, I didn't hear what you
Warrior
said.
period. Warrior period.
Warrior period. Yeah, I was just, this seems very intensively focused on elementary and some middle. I mean, is that, I'm just not reading it right.
I think that the majority of staffing is elementary, right? And I think that has been a strategy in the past, and I'm not sure whether it's a good strategy or a bad strategy. Early intervention is a pretty good strategy, and I think we can see that both from how our kindergartners come in versus our graduation rates, that over time, we're doing okay, but I think we could definitely do better. And so in high school, a lot of there's not as much kind of intensive intervention as there is in elementary school.
So I know in elementary school, there's PALs to determine who needs intervention. What happens to the older kids? How do we determine who else needs intervention?
Older kids right now are primarily determined by course success grades, standards of learning assessments. Middle school has a program that all 5 middle schools run called Reading Plus. It has a screener tool as part, so all 5 middle schools screened all their students this year in Reading Plus. Albemarle High School did the same thing for 9th graders, but there is no kind of division-wide screener other than course success and standards of learning assessments.
Do we need another screener? I mean, it seems like we know PALS data, and we talk about it, we kind of count on it as being a thing. Is this what happens in middle and high school? Is that sufficient?
I would say that we'll get to recommendations at the very end.
Okay.
But I think that's definitely an area for conversation.
Okay.
This might be part of that recommendations bit at the very end, but I couldn't do the math quickly enough when the data was up, and I know that you said that there are issues with it. Is there a range of, I guess, numbers of students who need interventions to the number of interventionists for each school? Is it, I imagine it's a broad range. Again, I couldn't do the math right as I was looking at it.
Yeah, could you move that slide back? I think we're talking about the same one.
The data slide?
Correct.
Yeah.
This one.
So I think it would just be useful for me, certainly, to, just have
There's a range.
divided
right?
by D.
Sure.
And then also, I wonder if when, principals are doing you said that it's mostly site-based decision-making, if when they're doing their decision-making, if that ratio is, discussed with whomever they discuss it with.
Like a caseload? Like a caseload kind of thing?
Yeah,
Would it-
I know that right now also hiring is an enormous issue.
Sure. And I think in general, like for Title I, we use a caseload of 30 students to an interventionist.
Okay.
And so that ends up being kind of a rule of thumb.
Okay.
You'll see, like at certain schools, Meriwether Lewis has 63 students receiving intervention and half of an interventionist.
Yeah, right.
So that interventionist has the 15, I'd say, most intensive students, and the rest are provided their Tier 2 intervention kind of in the classroom. You'll see that at a lot of the non-Title I schools. So different schools have different strategies for how to provide that tiered support based on that staffing. But the staffing largely kind of rolls down from what's provided to the schools with principals and each school making decisions about how to provide supports to students using various strategies.
So with those variations in schools, can you say that every student who needs Tier 2 or Tier 3 intervention gets it if the schools all have different strategies?
I would say that students who are behind to the point that we would think that they would need Tier 2 or Tier 3 usually get something. I do think that there's variance in what they receive depending on their school.
So the numbers in D are people who need Tier 2 and Tier 3, because Tier 1's classroom, everyone gets it.
The numbers in D are the number of students that the principals have reported are receiving tiered supports at their building.
As of January 1 or whatever it was pulled.
As of, last week.
Not-
Yeah. It's not a live number.
As an information piece for me, I know that FTE is like a budgetary term, sort of, to capture how much money we're putting into them.
Sure.
But can you just explain to me, like, the .3 at Murray, what does Murray have in place? Like, is there a reading specialist? Is this just like what is the actual structure?
In specific, usually in a situation like that, either a principal finds someone who wants to work part-time, which often it can be a retired teacher, right, wants to work from 8 to 10 in the morning, 5 days a week, and she sees her students 5 days in a row, or it becomes part of another job, like .7 TDRT, or, talent development teacher might be combined as to also be a .3 interventionist.
Okay, thank you.
How do we know if what we're doing is working? The level of staffing, and you mentioned everybody's in Tier 2 or 3 is getting something. Something is something working? Is something progress, or is something just attention?
I think you will hear from the teachers later, right, about how their schools might track that data, and progress monitor is a term that I've used, right? So progress monitoring is data that we capture every 2 to 4 weeks on each individual student to see whether or not they're making progress. If they aren't, then they need a more intensive intervention. If they are, they might get out of intervention, or they stay in intervention until they have caught up. Again, I think that there is a weakness in tracking that from a central level. It all is getting tracked at the school level, but it definitely, Ed Insight should be able to do that for us if we can figure out how to make it more accessible, and/or if we need another program that makes it easier to track that data.
Do we like Ed Insight, or would we prefer this program with the commercial? I mean, I couldn't tell if this whole
Yes.
thing was like a push to adopt this.
It is
which
not
I
a
don't
push
mind
to.
if-
It
I don't mind if it
is in our, no, it's not a push to. It is a recommendation. We adopted it in Site 5 years ago. It went through an RFP, request for proposal process. I think in the last 5 years, there have been other programs that have sprung up that may or may not be better than Ed Insight. I do think going through the process again to make sure that we have the best data kind of transferability software would be wise at this time, as the original contract with Ed Insight has run its course, and we're now just kind of on a year-to-year to keep the database going. One of the issues currently with Ed Insight is that every plan ends every year, and then we start again at the following school year. So it does inhibit us a little bit from saying it's working. The students started in first grade, and now they're great in third grade because they're in there as 3 separate plans. And that's just the reality of the current situation that we're in.
So, Mr. Domer, I want to tell you, I really appreciate the transparency, the way we're currently staffing. Tonight at all, are you going to preview at all the changes that we want to recommend to the board around more centralized, we've had some questions from board members around, individual principals making decisions, and there's variability among the schools, and we've been doing some work to...
I think we've been doing some work heading into the budget cycle and heading into staffing meetings to try and at least target preliminarily how much at a minimum of that differentiated staffing should be targeted towards intervention, and being able to kind of set it aside in order to kind of make sure that we're more able to more equitably meet the needs of students across schools. I think that's an important kind of first step in probably a process as, to go towards equitability, right? Like, it's not something that probably can be turned around on a dime, but being able to say, well, at your school, based on your numbers, I would think you should have 2.2 interventionists. So let's pull that from your differentiated staffing to make that number 2.2. And then think about how that impacts other things that are priorities like class sizes, numbers of sections, different courses we're offering, and solving those problems.
So in other words, just the Reader's Digest version, we're going to become more directive around how schools assign intervention staffing to be sure that it doesn't get lost in the differentiated blob. And in addition to that, reading will be another area where we'll become more directive. The other piece is that we're developing one page in the budget notebook where you'll be able to go and see where the intervention and reading staffing is going rather than having to put it all together based on information on the other pages. So that's a move towards transparency as well. Ms. Collins, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to say, with the Virginia Literacy Act, we have an opportunity that they're assigning certain staffing. We are above the requirements already, but that gives us an opportunity to take a look at the numbers and make it more apparent of what we want to happen in each school. So you'll see in the budget book our expectations around how differentiated staffing is spent towards reading. So we're going to be very clear about that, and you'll see that. We haven't had all the conversations with our principals yet, so we were reluctant to put anything in front of the board before our principals.
And again, it is a recommendation, so we'll be bringing that to you to look at. So again, you'll be able to scan it like you're doing now, and you can say, hey, are you sure that you got enough here? I mean, we're going to want your input on that, but you haven't really been able to give input in the past because the information was in different places. And that was something I noted in a few conversations having at the board level, was board members saying, well, I really can't see how you're using the staffing, and that's a concern for me. And I really appreciate Ms. Collins, Dr. Kaiser, Mr. Domer working on that. They showed me a new, Ms. Schmidt showed me a new sheet today where it starts to lay it out so that we don't want to remove all the decision-making from principals, but at one of the areas where Albemarle County Schools used to pride itself on was, they called it site-based management. And that has advantages. We certainly have creative, smart people running the schools that are good leaders, but it can get in the way of equity when you just leave everything, the whole utilization of resources up to the site. So we're going to try to thread the needle between providing direction, providing a guaranteed viable support system, and the principal having leeway to use some of the staffing in areas to address their strategic school improvement plan. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to be sure you knew we're heading somewhere with this. We're not just saying, well, it's a problem, but we're kind of doing something about it.
So, and each year, sorry.
Okay, I have a question about the reading program. The parent that spoke to us mentioned how they had to get outside help because of problems with reading. If a student is identified as having a reading problem, what additional help is provided in either tier 2 or 3 that might be able to help in situations like that?
I think most of that support comes at the elementary level. And if a student is struggling in our core program, being a reader, typically the first line of intervention or intensive support is in the program, the kind of coordinating program called SIPS, which is sometimes delivered in the classroom depending on the school and the level, and sometimes by a reading specialist or a reading interventionist. Kindergarten, first grade students are often seen by what we term a PALS interventionist, because it's often paid with the PALS money, that additional column of cash kind of support again, often using SIPS and that kind of program. I think parents who have to get outside support, right, they should work with their school-based team to try and figure out what additional support. I think this also goes back to that green triangle, right? And we always want to make sure that our core reading program is meeting the need of 85% of students, right? And we're trying to implement being a reader and implement it kind of in 3rd through 5th grade starting next year, making meaning this year. They go kind of, there's often a saying, we can't intervene our way out of this, right? And sometimes that's a budgetary thing that we say, but I think it's also, right, like, we have to have great classroom instruction. We do. That being said, there are going to be students who need more intensive supports, but both have to kind of walk hand in hand in that way. But our current reading program is based on the science of reading and has good kind of phonics instruction, and SIPS provides even more direct support. The publishers were on site in the last couple of weeks, and we've been doing learning walks with every principal. And we're really trying to ramp up the professional development for our school leaders and for our classroom teachers to make sure that we're getting the most out of that core program and in order to meet the needs of 85% of our students.
Okay, then I have one question. You might have, I think you already answered it up to a certain point, but I wasn't too sure about what the answer was. But in high school, what type of intervention occurs there compared to middle and elementary school? Is it anything similar at all?
I think that for some students, it can be similar, and it's a little different across all 3 high schools. But I think, again, I think there is less kind of that intense, like, small group intervention by and large across the high school than there is in elementary. It's more different courses or more systemized kind of holistic supports. I think that question will best be asked to our high school teacher, interventionist who's here, about what that looks like.
Okay, and one last question.
Sure.
You mentioned that this chart may not be complete, but I noticed that in Monticello there are 0 students listed as receiving intervention. So is that just because the data wasn't available?
I would say that that is a slight mistake that I will update.
Okay, right.
A couple of other things. I was in a number of schools over the course of the last week and became aware of the increase in data collection on a regular basis, and all of the people were supportive of that. My question gets into, do we need more support in terms of doing that data collection in the individual schools, or is this coming strictly from the teachers, and potentially how much of their time is that taking? The other thing that I've been aware of is in some schools, whether it's specialists or interventionalists, that other teachers are getting pulled in because there aren't enough of the interventionists or the specialists to cover what the needs are. And my question there is, over the course of the school year, over the course of the summer, will there be some professional development so there are more qualified people in these schools who can step in if the needs are higher than the staffing can handle?
And before you answer that, I just want to, for the sake of time, I'm not sure how much time you wanted to reserve for us to be in these small group discussion, say that we have 30 minutes left budgeted for whatever is remaining in this presentation.
Then I think I'm going to hold that question because I'll get to it.
I didn't mean to cut it off, John, I just wanted to make them aware.
Professional development is a bullet on the recommendations, so we'll hit it at that slide. And I did maybe want to take a 5-minute break just as we go into this next session. And this is how I think it's going to work. We have 5 teachers with us. Krista Liberman is the assistant principal at Scottsville and former SBIC coordinator at Brownsville. Denise Bachman is our SBIC coordinator at Stone Robinson. Linnell Rackness is our SBIC coordinator at Lakeside. Tina Good at Burley. And Beth White from Western Albemarle. We did have one other high school teacher who had a bit of an emergency and can't join us tonight, but we have this table up here in front of the dais, and we have 2 tables in room 241. So after our 5-minute break, if we could have maybe 3 board members up here and 2 board members at each table in 241. The teachers are going to rotate. They're going to spend about 8 minutes with each of you, talking about how the process works at their school. The questions I'd love for you to have in your head is just be listening for commonalities, similarities, differences, and how that helps you kind of think about the system as a whole. Then we'll come back and I will quickly run through next steps, and you guys can provide some feedback. Okay, so 5 minutes.
You sound like me. Sounds great, thank you.
Thank you.
started thinking about it and started writing things down.
Great.
So I think some of our, let me start with the GLOWs. I think our GLOWs and our GROWs closely match Albemarle County's mission statement, and so much of what you just said through your slides did too. But we take very seriously our targeted instruction to meet the very specific needs of our students. So we are very specific in those academic needs, and social emotional needs come into that too, to really expedite their growth, which is a huge part of intervention. And I have a few little examples, little anecdotes of all of these, but for the sake of time, if we have time, I'll come back to this. Just little fun stories. Kind of our second GLOW is, I think we do coordinate and collaborate with our classroom teachers really well. Craig mentioned Being a Reader is our core curriculum, and at our school, we do use its kind of intervention partner from Collaborative Classroom called SIPS, as Craig mentioned, and they do complement each other. And he also mentioned this, but good core instruction with the plus on top of it is essential. It just does not work if the interventionist is working with small groups 20 minutes a day. You need the core plus. So that coordination is essential. And I think one thing we've done well at Stone Robinson is we've set aside extra time. So each week, each grade level has what's called extra specials. And so that is a little extra chunk of time for the classroom teacher to meet with interventionists or whoever's specialist. I met with all my grade levels. Was it Monday or Tuesday? They all mixed together, and we reviewed your PALS data. And we looked at all the kids, and are we still seeing the correct kids? Do we need to exit some? Do we need to bring some in? And yes to both of that. We did both of those things. But even doing that on a more frequent basis. So the third GLOW is also just the thoughtful and continuous collection and review of data. And I just spoke to that. But, in the upper grade levels, they're really good about doing it even more frequently through unit pre-assessments. Every unit pre-assess everyone, and the groups are different. The carpenter's son did really well in the measurement unit. He's in a completely different group than he or she was, 3 weeks before. So keeping it very fluid. And exit slips they use a lot to check in during the unit and kind of revamp who goes and receives extra help. So those are kind of the three GLOWs. Do you want to glow a little bit? Sure.
Well, I love hearing what's happening at Stone Robinson and having had experiences at Brownsville, which was previously the largest it was the largest in the county, and now being at Scottsville, which is one of the smallest out there. I see such continuity in what we're doing at the elementary level. And when I saw the proposed, belief statements, I believe that at the elementary level, we're really hitting all of those things. Certainly, there's room for improvement, but we have systematic screeners. We have a collection of tools to progress monitor. And while there's some choice, it's the same collection that we're all drawing from to monitor students. We have the same process to communicate with families, the SBIT process, and Ed Insight, as clunky as it is, I've seen teachers, interventionists, working really hard to use that data system so that we are able to track students over time. I feel like that's a real strength. I loved hearing about how you're collaborating with your teachers. Time, of course, is always a challenge. And we've done a similar thing where we have a Thursday afternoon rotating schedule where our interventionists and special education teachers can meet with the classroom teachers. Such an important point about not having intervention be in isolation to what's happening in Tier 1. And Craig spoke to the facilitators from Being a Reader coming and doing the learning walks. And one of the things they noticed as a trend across the county is wanting to help us improve connecting what's happening at the reading table, to what's happening at the independent work, to what's happening in intervention, so that it's all, a beautiful cohesive piece that makes sense to the students. Yeah, so I agree with all that you're saying. It really feels good.
There are definitely areas of growth, but I think there are some real strengths. Craig spoke to kind of my grows, and it kind of relates to that staffing spreadsheet. To me, staffing is difficult in intervention. Not always. It's just the consistency, the quality, and the quantity of staffing. And because, as you mentioned, it's paramount that we create this beautiful circle where intervention communicates with core and the kids see, and the kids do, oh, Miss Weary, we just read that word yesterday. We're coordinating to try to help you learn it, so they recognize it, and I think it's very powerful. But the problem is, we're looking for someone right now. And this was the same case last year, and we found someone wonderful in February and hired her. But when the new year came about, we could only offer her 0.4 for the next year. She needed a full-time position. Mm-hmm. She worked so hard from February on to get to know the core curriculum, to get to know all the teachers, because when you're collaborating, there's a lot of upfront getting to know if you're going to do it well. And so she was amazing, and we wanted to keep her, but we couldn't. Good luck, she went to Woodbrook. So she did stay in the county. She didn't stay here. On the flip side of that, you get people who aren't so good when you're hiring this time of year. So I think just being able to hire good people and keep them, because that collaboration piece, and not only I collaborate with our social emotional and our guidance counselor, because my students, I'm on a track to meet with this student to feed the guinea pigs and this student to start at 8 o'clock. And part of that is to make sure they're there. If not, they get in the van and drive to their house, because attendance is a big issue for a lot of the intervention kids. They're not at school. So you coordinate with the guidance counselor and with your assistant principal and to help get them to get the families and the students the resources they need. So it's kind of a central role that takes a lot of upfront time to be effective, so constant change is not good. So that would be an area of growth. Some of the other things, just continual training for the classroom and intervention teacher, and sometimes together, would be another grow. And then just to continue the division PLCs, I think is very helpful. So those were just a few grows that I had. But the staffing is hard, because it's kind of a central role that needs to know a little bit about everything on the school. Special education, we coordinate with all the time. So, but it sounds like we want to work towards that.
Yeah, sounds,
Until the group walks in here.
okay, we'll keep going. Our students also score low in math, so.
If you ask the teachers, they want math intervention,
I was
just
gonna
like
say,
us about the reading intervention.
So, I mean, and I don't know if you can have, 4/10 of a reading interventionist and her other 6/10, but I am concerned because our scores are consistently low in math, and that is a gateway to getting the algebra and,
That was
getting through
definitely
school.
one of my grows, is how we find that balance to, we've prioritized reading intervention.
Which is
a lot,
important.
Which is very important. And so in our situation this year, we're using some of our interventionists to do a little bit of math intervention, but we actually just have a teaching assistant, very highly qualified, doing the rest of it, and then point something of our media specialists. So it feels, it's working, it's making a difference, but it
Feels like we need a more systematic.
time. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
Well, you have your prom outfit on, your sweetheart dance suit.
Okay, we're off.
Oh, we moved?
Yes.
Okay.
We moved, right?
We did that terminology.
Have a great evening.
Weird movies. Okay, where do we go? Oh, okay.
Your escorter.
I was gonna say, it sounds like a very old-fashioned term. Hi there. I'm Kate.
I'm Linnell.
Linnell.
Mhm.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And I'm Judy.
Nice to meet you. I'm at Lakeside Middle School, and at Lakeside, intervention is definitely a team effort. I'm the only interventionist there, and I'm also the testing coordinator, and I'm the SBIT chair. So we all work together to support the students. At the beginning of the year, we use our test scores and previous involvement in SBIT as our starting point. And then as we get to know students, we gather more data. We modify our list. We have a list by grade level. And each week we meet about each student, not each week, each student, but about 2 or 3 students at a time. We have a discussion protocol that we follow, so our meetings are pretty efficient because teachers love their kids and they want to talk and tell so many stories. We've really kind of refined that. That's something that we're doing really well, and to the point where we can get through about 3 students and troubleshoot, problem solve, brainstorm the whole thing, walk away with next steps, with everyone knowing exactly what they need to do by the end of the meeting. So that's been a real growth of ours that I'm thankful for. And then our intervention runs in conjunction with Chomp Choice, which is something that we're doing this year. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, students can sign up for an activity to pursue. Students that are identified for intervention receive some of their intervention during that time. They're guaranteed to have one activity of their choice, but we have to either kind of prioritize reading or math because one of the big things that we want to focus on is not taking all of their free time for intervention. Many students stay both, and so it's kind of a discussion around it. We need to decide who's going to get to work with that student at that time.
And that takes place in the weekly meeting?
Yes, sir. And then every 4 weeks, after the first 8 weeks of the student being in Chomp Choice, so they have to go through 2 rotations. It's a 4-week cycle. We have a review meeting of that first group, and then after that, every 4 weeks, they're reviewed. Their progress monitoring data is reviewed, and we get through in that same weekly meeting. We just replace it with our Tier 2 and Tier 3 review meeting. And then at that point, students can move up or down in tier depending on how they're doing. And had some success. It's been exciting to see that some students have moved out of intervention completely. That's the beauty of middle school. They just sometimes find their stride. But then some have not been successful. And so sometimes we have to adjust the intervention and we make those decisions then. Or even if we have to move to testing, then that will provide the necessary support they need that way. We'll have the data that we need to support that decision. I communicate with families about all those things, and teachers communicate with students as they enter into the program. So I wanted to make sure Tina has time. One thing that we're wanting to work on is we really want to work on providing shelter time for intervention. Outside of the weekly Chomp Choice time, they also receive their intervention in the classroom, just like Mr. Donald said. So our teachers have been very, very wonderful about doing that. We have the Reading Plus program. Nothing beats a good teacher, though. And so it would be great to have a little more staffing around that, just so that students are receiving not just computer-based intervention programs constantly. It does cover it, but it's not deep enough for a lot of students. So we need some sheltered time in our schedule, and we're working on that. We have our principals working on some ideas for next year. And I think that's it.
Just one real quick question. Are you finding in 6th, 7th, or 8th more success?
6th grade.
6th grade, okay.
If we can get them by 6th grade, it's a little easier. And when you have an ESL student, that's a whole nother. The thing about reading is every student struggles to read for a different reason. And so you have to kind of really get to know the kid. And you can see some general patterns, but I'd say 6th grade. Sure.
Much more than 6. So when kids are starting 6th grade, do they get the insight data from their 5th grade? Does the 6th grade teacher has that whole?
Yes, the insight data rolls up to us.
Okay.
And also the literacy profile data, the 5th grade teachers work really hard they were intensive to do the literacy profile data, and Burley in particular. And we use that a lot because it's really helpful to get a better, rounder picture, and not just one SOL data point.
Right,
And we
right,
really
right.
need at least 3 data points and teacher recommendations to help us know more about the student.
So all of the interventions, and I'm sorry, I definitely
No,
don't
no.
want to, and so all the interventions happen during the day,
Mm-hmm.
and you're saying there's the one chomp choice throughout the week. And so when would be the other time?
During class, we have
During class, okay.
they do differentiated instruction. They're all de-leveled. And so it's not ideal, but
Right.
it's when we're trying to do the tier 2. And then I work with the tier 3 students, so I pull them an extra 2 times. And so they do miss some time of their class, but it's kind of a dance I have to work with their teacher and with the student.
Right.
Are you willing to give up some of, drama to come and work with me one-on-one? And that becomes a relationship too. Sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's harder, It's
Yeah.
another barrier we have to work through.
And did you start out this year doing both chomp choices in intervention? I sort of thought, okay.
You mean for a student to have?
For a student to have intervention during both chomp choice
No.
periods? Okay.
That was a really big priority of Mr. Craddock.
Okay, great.
That they needed one.
Okay, thank you.
Officially introduce myself. I'm Tina Good. I'm at Burley Middle School, and I've been with the county since 1995. I've taught language arts, all different levels in middle school, and I've also worked in intervention during that whole period, so kind of weaving in and out. I was at Walton for 15 years, and I was there as a literacy specialist. And about 13 years ago, the county made a decision to not have literacy and math specialists in the middle school level, and so my role was phased out. And then I was moved to Burley, which has been lovely. And at that time, I taught regular language arts and then also did intervention there. So at Burley, we have 285 students receiving either math or reading in intervention or both. So we didn't parse that out, I don't think. And I did want to point out for us how it really funnels down. So Agner Hart has 150, these are our 4 feeder schools, right? Agner, Mountain View, Stone Robinson, Stony Point. Agner Hart has 5 interventionists with 115 students in intervention. Mountain View has 4 interventionists with 117 students in intervention. Stone Rob has 1.4, Stony Point has 1.4. Burley has 185 students in intervention. And how many interventionists do we have?
I'm afraid to ask.
That is me. I'm your interventionist. I'm the only one. And so we have used our RTI money, our intervention money, and our differentiation money so that I coordinate all the other teachers who are now running our intervention groups, but I'm the only one coordinating it. So we have math, 8th grade math and language arts teachers who are running kind of reading and math support on alternate days because the middle school schedule changed. So we have 8th grade and math. In 8th grade, you do math and reading on alternate days. So students who would have been in intervention classes are enrolled in an additional class. I think we're the only middle school doing that model, but there are teachers, regular teachers running those classes, and I coordinate with them to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. And then one thing that our principals have done a great job of is working within the new middle school model that we have for scheduling and trying to carve out protected time. So that's been a really interesting experiment that we're running, and it's been kind of fun to see some new things. So that's one of the models that they came up with. The second one that we have is that we are running flexible grouping during what would be our chomp time, I think, is the morning time that you hear. So our advisory time, we have 2 to 3 days a week, usually 3 days a week, where it's flexible grouping, academic shifting. So I also coordinate that. So we have groups that are consistently meeting, and then we have groups that are students that are pulled individually for support. It's not quite as fluid as what's happening at Sutherland, and I think honestly it's because I can't coordinate but so much. So it's, I think we could do a better job, but why we need more people to do it, because what their system is what we would want to be doing. We have so many kids that it gets a little clunky. And then the other thing that we've done this year that's brand new is we've created a Tier 3 class within our exploratory time. So exploratories are 84 minutes. That was the new middle school schedule, that all exploratories are 84 minutes. And that it works well for many things, but it doesn't work well at all for intervention protected time. And so we chose to have a Tier 3 class with parent permission. So the students are in my class, need both math and reading intervention. They are solidly below benchmark, so they're usually somewhere on the SOL range of 325, which would put them somewhere in the 3rd grade level. And they are for 6th and 7th grade, just those 2 grades. And so we spend 84 minutes a day, or every other day, on their, focusing on reading intervention for half of that time and math intervention for the other half. And then on Fridays, we do STEM research, we do STEM projects. So I have a Shannon grant that we use to buy cool projects, and we've done lots of fun things. So we try to balance that so they do get fun things in their day. So that's been a really interesting new class, so I've been excited about that.
Want to move us along?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yes, thank you
Sounds
so
like
much.
you're
I'm gonna
coordinating
toss
a
these
lot.
out.
Oh, yes, please.
This actually comes from a request that the principal of, at Walton made, and then it was shared with us at Early. So it's good. You can look through that. It mirrors what Craig was showing you, and then on the back, it does talk about the 4 things that are really critical to have for good RTI programs, and how important it would be for us to have that in secondary level, because ours are not quite as robust as they could be. But thank you for your time. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you for staying late tonight.
I have handwritten notes that I will not be handing you copies of.
Perfect. You'll memorize them.
Thank you. I'm Beth White. I'm from Western Albemarle, and I am the coordinator for the Learning Center there, and I'm also, my other title is interventionist. So when you looked at the data that Craig had put up, and Western had a 0.2 RTI and then a 0.8 in another column, those two together equal 1.0, and that's me. That's the extent of our funding for intervention at Western at this point. But I wanted to start off with some positives. Let me tell you what I think we're doing really well at Western. We have great teachers who go above and beyond for their students. And I'm sure this is true at all the schools, but I just want to talk about us because I know us. But we have teachers who, when they have kids who are struggling, who need some extra help, they will meet them before school, they'll meet them after school, they'll meet with them during their planning periods. All these times which, they're not on the contract to do that, but that's what they do. So that's one of the reasons that we have a lot of success, I think, at Western, is because of teachers who do that. Also, I really want to give credit to this body and the central office for ACPS for really bolstering our social emotional learning supports this year. It has been marvelous having extra staff for social work and school counseling. It's made a big difference. Our kids have been very much in need, as you know, but it has made a tremendous difference to have that support, so that's fabulous. The other thing I want to say is that we are in our 4th year of having our Learning Center. And through our Learning Center, we host the peer tutoring program. And this year we have 57 students taking the peer tutoring class and another 25 working as volunteer peer tutors. So we have in the 80s of peer tutors. They're doing a great job boosting learning for our middle achievers and our high achievers. So we feel like we're doing a lot to sort of just lift people up at those levels. Our peer tutors are not interventionists, however, nor should they be. And so the group that they're not reaching, and it's not appropriate for them to really reach, is our lower achievers. And that's where we need the support to come in terms of instructional support and intervention. I did also want to put out there as a sort of a neutral thing, I'm a big fan of the STEP program. Y'all familiar with STEP? Do you know what that is? Okay, short-term.
Oh, right.
Something program to, is that what it is? Okay, thank you, I couldn't remember the E. It hasn't been implemented or actualized at Western the way I think it can be, and I think we'll get there. We had some staffing issues with that this year. So I think it has potential to be a very good intervention for us, but it hasn't happened yet, but we believe it.
Schools are using it, yeah.
And it can be, I think, a brilliant thing. So I'm sort of neutral on that right now. Areas for growth, as has been mentioned a few times, we don't really have an intervention system in place for secondary intervention. A lot of us who work in this field feel like we're having to make things up because we don't know. We have to go out there and find our own resources. We need, in the absence of a universal screener, for years we've been hoping to have a universal screener for reading. We do rely on things like SOL scores, and when we used to give them math tests in middle school, we would rely on those kinds of standardized scores. But we don't have any kind of program right now. We also don't have any reading specialists or math specialists in our school. We used to, before the instructional coaching program came along, we had specialists in the high school with those titles, but then those specialists sort of went away when the instructional coaching program came into place, and they're really apples and oranges, not really one replacing the other. So that was sort of the end of that time. Around the same time, we also had sort of the beginning of the end of some of our Tier 2 programs. Like I just was overhearing what they were telling you in the last session about this class that they've created for some of those kids. We used to have that at Western. We had something called the Launch Program for freshmen. And it was for kids who had routinely failed their reading and math SOLs. We don't have that anymore. We don't have our Core Plus program anymore. We don't have a math skills class anymore. So all freshmen have to go into Algebra 1 if they are not higher than that. And a lot of them are not ready. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. We used to have standard level classes, and we've collapsed those for good reasons. But what's happened is that we have advanced level classes now that are only partially collabed with special education teachers. So we have, again, the kids who are not identified as being disabled but are needy of intervention are not getting it in that class as much as they could be, and they're not getting it because we don't have the Tier 2 interventions. So without the Tier 2 structures, what happens is kids who are most in need are ending up in Tier 3. In addition to running the Learning Center, I counted them today, I'm working with 10 students on reading, writing, executive function skills, SOL remediation, and work keys remediation, either once or twice a week. But I think I'm the only person who is employed as a regular educator to do that kind of work. And that's in addition to running the Learning Center all day long, every day. So it's not like I have to find the time.
You need another half FT. You need to clone yourself.
I do.
Another.
I need a clone.
Yeah.
See, that's all right. That's what we'll do. We do have other people in the school who are working in specialized instruction with our special education students. So it's a little different take on it, but that is one-on-one Tier 3 intervention in reading and math for some of our kids. And I feel like we're doing a good job of that. I feel like we meet that pretty well. It's the regular ed kids that we're not able to meet their needs right now. I did also want to say that one of the things that I am concerned about is we went to our administration 5 years ago, those of us who were on the school-based intervention team, which I used to be the coordinator for. We went to the administration 5 years ago and said, we're noticing through SBIT, our kids don't have study skills, they don't know how to study, and they're completely stressed out by this, and anxiety is through the roof. We need to create a learning center for short-term support for kids to learn these skills. And we had a principal at the time who said, that is a great idea, let's do that, and put the money behind it. So we have that, but that's our school that has that. And I feel like, and it's not perfect by any stretch. I mean, there's a lot of ways we could improve. But why do we get that and another school doesn't get that? That's what I'm concerned about in terms of that.
One concern, just looking at the chart that you put up, that we put all of our Title I focus on elementary reading, which is clearly important. But then we have 111, interventionists in middle school, and then it just falls off the map. And I've always been concerned that high school graduation rate is a pretty crude metric of how skilled or how knowledgeable or ready for the, we say we're launching good citizens and good workers and people ready to go on for, secondary ed. I'm not sure that's true. I mean, we've never done a 5 years out survey, follow-up.
That's a great point, yeah.
And, I mean, I've been at graduations where, teachers were looking, John he may pass his test so he can graduate with the rest of the class at the last minute. That is not, doesn't sound like a robust outcome to me. I mean, it's good that they're graduating, we get our numbers, we look good, sort of, but our job is to make the kids be good.
When I talked to the rest of my intervention team today to prepare for this, one of the folks on the team said, we do a really good job at Western of getting kids across the stage. So if we feel like there's somebody who's in danger of not graduating, and they're in their senior year, we will put all of our resources on that kid to help them get there. So
do it in ninth grade.
No, I know. Well, that's the thing, is we need to identify them better in ninth grade. We need tools to do that, and then we need staffing to do it. But one of the things is that we lose kids. They will take an alternate path. They will leave us and go somewhere else if they're not finding success with us. Or they will get the GED, or they will do something else. So sometimes it doesn't really affect our graduation rate, but it still is like we didn't meet that kid that they needed to do. We didn't help them get there.
I mean, when you look at the data about high school kids, elementary kids love school, at least at the beginning, and by the time they're in high school, about 30% are like, it's okay. I have to think that part of that is we're not really engaging the kids in any kind of meaning, not in any kind, but in as meaningful a way as as we could.
I mean, there are lots and lots and lots and lots of kids who are engaged.
Oh, I know.
I don't want us to dismiss that.
Oh, I know.
I also want to give Craig some credit. You didn't teach your own forward in your presentation, but Craig is.
That's the last slide.
Is it? Is that what's happening?
Is it where the balloons come down?
Pass out the sheet.
What?
Quick question, what is the name of the program freshman year that was eliminated?
Launch, LAUNCH. We've had that for maybe 7 or 8 years at Western. And it was a math teacher who was also a reading specialist. Taught it, and then they pulled in a special education teacher as well. It's a double block class. Very successful. But Craig's looking for people to become certified as reading specialists. He's putting it out there for people to take. We've got some interest in that. And this is a great thing, because we need people who actually are trained to be available.
This is a really terrible, really stupid question. Are reading interventionists all licensed teachers, and they're just specialists? And then they have special.
I think we need to get up with Jesse on having. Yeah. I think he needs to know the dates, because notice it's switched. Well, the reason that they were here last time was just because Trevor, well, also Trevor had emailed me.
Thank you very much.
And because I had said something about that.
Well, it might be.
So it's like, who's coming? Told him all of a sudden at 4 o'clock. That was good.
I thought I was really being silent when I did it until I saw Ellen looking at me, and you were looking.
Thanks. Ellen's very white.
God, it was silent.
Are you planning to leave the furniture?
Are you presenting to us? Wow.
Be cold.
Yeah.
We need to start on bonfire.
I need to be sitting at home in front of the fireplace.
Always learn how much I don't know. Yeah.
great. I mean, I found that very useful.
He's just doing it to make me feel better.
I think we're ready when you are.
All right, I'm going to give you just a minute and a second to consolidate any notes. That is still working. But I did, I sat through all the presentations as well and heard some great questions. I'm not sure what was going on in 241, but I imagine it was similar. What I heard and what I've been hearing kind of throughout my time in the interventionist DPLC and my work as a...
Craig, could you speak a little closer to the microphone, please?
Is it turned on?
I think we're good now.
Yep.
All right, perfect. I heard lots of good questions. I've heard from the interventionists throughout the year in the DPLC in talking to principals. I think what you probably heard was, great things going on at schools. Teachers working extremely hard to make sure that students have success. Principals working extremely hard to come up with creative solutions with the staffing that they have and all the different priorities that pull on that differentiated staffing bucket, from class size to sections to being able to offer a course that students want to intervention and tiered supports. And those are always difficult choices to make, I think, as a principal, and then it's difficult as teachers sometimes to implement the best system. And you probably heard different solutions at every school, which is part of, I think, what we're talking about here tonight. So I'll give you just 1 minute if you have any last-minute thoughts to write down kind of on your organizer or the notes that you're taking.
Are you planning to collect this?
I am not, but after I give my recommendations, I'm planning to give you 5 to 10 minutes to talk as a board. I'm going to sit down again about things that you came away with throughout the whole work session tonight and questions you might still be having. So, unless we legally have to collect it, but I'm not sure of those rules. Okay, I'm going to talk about some of the immediate next steps that we're planning to take kind of from a central office standpoint and in my position with a little bit of a caveat, right, that we're undergoing an instructional audit hopefully soon, which I imagine they will have some things to say about our tiered supports and being able to leave some room to hear their suggestions and kind of put it into our building system. But really 3 big themes to increase the clarity of vision around a multi-tiered system of supports, increase consistency across schools, and improve data collection, I think are probably the 3 most critical steps that we can take and probably would take no matter what was recommended to us. We'll create a division-level MTSS team to try and further research best practices and be able to make recommendations both to schools and for schools, right? Like whether or not we do need a universal screener or whether there is a need for additional staffing, being able to make those recommendations, which I think is also a byproduct of trying to reserve some of that differentiated staffing for intervention, is to see what happens, because I know that every principal makes the best decisions that they can with all sorts of competing priorities. We're going to collaborate with the Virginia Department of Education. They have an office around multi-tiered systems of support in order to just see what other school divisions in Virginia are using, what kind of best practices they have, what kind of staffing ratios, things like that. And we'll create a division MTSS manual in order to have resources and very clearly articulate our vision. We're going to continue our intervention DPLC. I think it has been good for the interventionists to be able to share ideas and talk about both problems of practice and successes. And they've been an incredible, I think, resource whenever you check in with them as stakeholders, right? They're living it. We are going to focus on professional development. We are working to start a reading specialist cohort next fall. Currently, we have 29 teachers interested in becoming reading specialists, which we think will kind of bolster our skill set. In addition, we're going to collaborate with the Department of Special Ed to really offer professional development around specific intervention strategies and programs for at least 1 week this summer. And we're also going to do a resource audit and think about school board adoption of certain resources, trying to really figure out what all the different resources that schools are using are, be able to curate and evaluate those, ranging from universal screeners to intervention support to progress monitoring tools, so that we get a menu and bank of resources that are available to every school. And then we are going to enter a procurement process, either for a new database software or to continue with that insight if we feel that it is still the best. In the meantime, we are working to automate as much data as possible so that less is required of teachers. We've had some success already this year, and Greer uses an Ames web program, so we've worked hard so that when the student takes the progress monitoring tool, the data automatically goes into EdInsight without needing a teacher to do it. So we're trying to find and do more things like that as quickly as possible. Last slide. But
I'm going to propose that Sanuthi go first because I believe she needs to be out of here by, I said it was going to be 7 minutes, and we are pushing 8:45, and I don't want you to miss your ride. So would you like to provide your thoughts, and then you can pack up if that works, or do you want to wait?
We can wait. Thank you.
It's just your mom waiting, no worries. I get it. Okay, that's all I wanted to propose. I'm happy to go round table with thoughts or any questions we have.
we did, I think what we're proposing is that this just be a board conversation with these two guiding questions. What did you hear that's encouraging tonight? And apparently also question number one, what would you like to hear more about? They're both equally important, so we put number one next to both of them. I'm just going to sit down and take notes, and then I'll come back up. We'll set it for maybe 10 minutes as a max for this conversation, and then I'll summarize and we'll be finished. Okay?
I'll kick us off. And I'm going to do a little bit of what's encouraging, but I think what's also humbling, because I think that's one of the things that really came out. So I think what's encouraging is particularly talking with the interventionists from the middle schools, the high schools, and the elementary schools. I think there's a lot of great innovative programs that are happening at the school level. Sometimes they're shared across the school, sometimes they're not. So I think encouraging is like, what are those schools already doing that we can figure out how to scale? But I have to pause and say what's humbling is when you look at the data that you shared. Thank you for bringing it together. I think we all have a feeling that, or I shouldn't speak for the board, but I speak for myself. But my gut is that those numbers, that 2,100, is probably bigger. There's probably more than 2,100 kids who need this intervention coming out of the pandemic. When you look, SOL scores are not screeners, they're not diagnostic, I don't believe they are, but when you look at the scores and when you look at those numbers, there's a lot of kids that are going to need this support. Particularly a lot of kids at middle and high school. The fact that many of these middle schools, all of these middle schools went through reading instruction during the pandemic. We're going to be seeing that, what's going to happen from that for years to come. And so I think for the board, this isn't a 1 or 2 year solution. This is a 5-year solution. And it's going to take a long time to do this, and it's also going to take a lot of money. So don't mean to be humbling, but I think to do right by our kids and our families, we've got to figure out a way to do this. Because right now, a lot of it's happening on the backs of the teachers who are also working a lot of extra hours to meet the needs, so.
And to your point, that involves kids at all grades.
Yeah, exactly.
Who
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
coming up.
Yeah.
And it's going to continue for quite a while. Dr. Haas, I'd like to ask you about the group that you met with on Monday from the other school divisions. Was this a topic during that meeting?
Yes, intervention was a topic.
And can you share any, best practices that you heard of?
Well, the encouraging thing for me was that we're using the same practices. So I feel encouraged by that. I think that the pieces that we've been more recent in adopting them and institutionalizing them so they become part of our culture of the work that we do. And the other piece around intervention was what I sensed, particularly from York County, was a greater accountability for results.
Thank you.
The same positives that Rebecca Berlin mentioned, and also the engagement of the interventionists who are here tonight. I mean, I was very impressed and in awe. My concerns are that all of our intervention focus, most of our intervention focus is at elementary school reading, and I think that's absolutely critical. It's necessary, but I don't think it's sufficient. I'd actually like to see the math scores going up too, and it seems like we don't have that built into this model. Also, I think the almost absence of intervention in middle and high school. I mean, I said this to the people at my table, but I'm impressed that we have a high graduation rate, but our scores still are poor for a lot of our kids, and graduation rate is the minimum that we should do. I mean, I think we really need to put some more resources into making our all of our kids, do better. I mean, they all can use some help. And then differentiated staffing. I know that in some schools, some of those funds are being used for social workers and other kinds of things that are needed. As you know, I've been a big proponent of mental health and other social supports. I think that should be owned by the division, and that the differentiated staffing should go to class sizes or more interventionist, and you shouldn't have to make that trade-off, I don't think. And then the other question everyone talked about is not having enough hours in the day and not enough time. And I know that you are looking at some, making the summer program more robust, and I just hope that we hear some more about that.
I definitely share all of the things that we talked about that have been encouraging. I really appreciated hearing from interventionists and really appreciated the candor that a lot of them shared with us, so thank you very much for that. It seems like sometimes in our presentations that we get programs that are like, oh, this feels good, and then we look at programs that are alarming. This is one of those, I feel alarmed by this because when I look at the numbers of the people who need intervention and the people we have to provide it, it just feels like a fire hose. Is that, I think, what you said maybe? Obviously, I'll just speak for myself, will want to look to fund intervention in a way that's more robust. But one thing that's been growing in my mind, and I'm very late to this, is that it feels like the funding, I'll just be candid, that we're basically fighting over crumbs. So when, at our table, when we heard certain programs went away and certain programs were replaced by other programs, and my first thought was, well, what's this other program doing? Can we do a program evaluation of this program? And it may be that both were successful, but one of them's gone now. So I just want to express a little bit of frustration in that, because I know that when we look at the budget, we are going to have to be making a lot of difficult decisions to serve all of our children. And it's natural for me to sort of pit these programs against each other, or these groups of staffers against each other, when really, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. But I will say that I am really looking forward to us funding intervention more robustly and more equitably across the county and across the schools.
Yep, so for verse number one, what did you hear that is encouraging? I found it encouraging that some of the steps that we put into place for elementary reading, I feel good about. We have a standard curriculum, being a reader, with a standard intervention targeting system, SIPS, that comes along with that. We have a universal screener, it's state mandated, but the PALS testing, I find that encouraging, and I'm hoping to see growth in that area based on that. What I would like to hear more about is perhaps in relation to the fact that we have a number one, which is math. I think it was echoed across every single middle, upper, and lower interventionist that there's no math program, and in particular, I know that was mentioned already by Ms. Acuff, or Dr. Acuff, but in addition, we don't have a universal screener. That was kind of a surprise for me. I thought MAPS testing was being used. So not having a universal screener, as Dr. Berlin said, the SOL is not a diagnostic to that extent. That is something I'd like to learn more about. And I echo everyone else's comments, so I'm trying to keep them brief so that we can move through.
All right, I echo really what everybody else has said too. I guess my comments would be sort of a paraphrase of number one. Instead of what would you like to hear more about, I would like to hear more about changes that we can make to sort of implement some of the things that the specialists told us about. And one of them would be restoring the reading and the math specialists in high schools. I don't think that we have those positions included in the high schools, so I think they really need to be restored. A second one would be also restoring maybe the remedial classes in high schools, because those two things would overlap, and I think that would really help us a whole lot for our graduation rate and our students as they go into the world. And then, like Ms. Carlson said, also the math screening program is something that I think we really need. So all of those things would be something that I'd like to see included in our budget in that paraphrase of question number one, the second number one.
I was really encouraged by meeting some of the interventionists, because it's very clear that they have a passion for this work and they know what they're doing. I would like to hear more about where we actually find more interventionists, even if we had the money to pay them, to put another gazillion of them in our budget. I don't think they grow on trees, but can we have some sort of way where we can help people get these endorsements or something, just because I don't think there are enough out there to hire, maybe.
Something that I think took me a lot by surprise was I'm agreeing with, well, one, this was already set as something that we are planning to do, but upping that tier 1 support just overall. But something that took me by surprise is the fact that there isn't that much support for math. That's something that I was hearing throughout all schools, was just that there was all the support for specifically elementary reading, but barely anything for math, which is really surprising when I'm remembering middle school. Like, a lot of the complaints I always heard was around math, with kids not understanding what was happening. And even now in high school, I'd like to say that our math teacher is an amazing one, but there is definitely like a lot of us having trouble, and like, since it's a small school, we're able to be more specialized, but with like bigger schools, that's not something that can be done since they don't have the staffing in order to like focus on each individual student. But like definitely a lot more focus on math and just upping that tier 1 in general, because as stated in the public comment, upping reading is also still important. Yeah.
I have one just quick, what we'd like to hear more about, just the audit that's being done and just how that dovetails into this information, and then we'll dovetail into the budget, just as we're thinking about the timing of that.
I think I'll have Dr. McLaughlin come up. He's probably most closely associated with the audit.
Hey, good evening, board members. Pat McLaughlin, Chief of Strategic Planning. For a quick update on the audit, it is right now, we are just waiting on a contract signature from the vendor that we are hoping to award the contract to. That has hit a couple snags just with some technology issues to get that going, but every day we're hoping that the news comes in that that is there. Once we have that, before we have that, we can't really publicly release the plans that made that company rise to the top of the RFP proposal. As soon as we have that, we'll certainly update the board and the public on what we're planning to do. We do feel like we're still in the window where we can meet the timeline originally presented of having this done by the end of the school year. And I know that we've got some set-aside money in the budget, if I'm remembering correctly, to do some immediate implementation of high-level recommendations that they're going to make. So I don't know if that gave you much detail, but I hope to be able to provide more as soon as we have the signed contract.
Thanks.
Does anyone else have any concluding or quick add-ons?
Thank you.
Yep.
I have one quick one, which is just whenever we do this kind of wish list, and Dr. Hoff, you're great at this, but just making sure it's tied to data. Like, I'm sure there were reasons why we cut some things, and I don't know what those are, so just making sure that we're being strategic and data-driven when we're deciding what to go with.
So the good news is we are going to have reading specialists at every school. And we never had math specialists at the high schools. So that would be an additional, something we need to take a look at as a potential best practice. I'm a little worried about ideas like increasing remedial classes. That would be a reversing of course that we've had over the years to not have students get buried kind of in a dungeon. Because I've spent time in those remedial classes. They are segregated by race, they're segregated by socioeconomic status, special education. So we've done a lot of work over the last decade, 15 years, and fought a lot of battles to eliminate levels so that those students can be working side by side with their peers. All students have the same standards that they're expected to learn. There are no remedial standards in Virginia for reading or math. So our goal has always been to have all the students together with the expectation that the teacher would differentiate instruction so all students could reach the standard. So that would be something we really need to do some research around to take a look at. But I really do appreciate all the input and feedback from the board. I'm encouraged with the fact that we're heading in the direction that many of you talked about. And I'm hoping that everyone can be encouraged because the numbers are big in terms of remediation. But the more and more we do to improve Tier 1 instruction and have greater fidelity to the curriculum, those numbers will come down. Thank you.
Sorry, I wanted to comment on something else that was just something I was thinking of. Was also, I remembered hearing about people that weren't able to get diagnoses about like mental disabilities and such, not being able to receive support they need. So I think that's something that we should be able to look at, or should look at, to see if that's something that's like either upping Tier 1 support a little more, or like trying to make slightly easier to go up into tier 2 so that, like, those people can get support they need.
I am going to end on that remark, thank you, and say thank you so much for this presentation. I will say, I think this is probably I feel like we were really engaged this session, and there were a lot of good questions, and that's a sign of a good work session. And I appreciated the format, and I appreciated the information that you gave us, so thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate having this conversation, and we'll keep working. Thank you.
6 months
Thanks
in,
to
it
all of
looks
the
pretty good.
interventionists that came out tonight.
Yes, thank all of the teachers. Thank you for, to Judy's point, being so candid with your thoughts. I really appreciate it. We all appreciate it. So with that, we are on to other business. Any other business? Hearing none. Going. We are, I believe, going to do a short closed meeting just to decide if we need another closed meeting later. So let's go ahead and do that. Can we get the motion?
I move that the School Board of Albemarle County, Virginia, go into a closed meeting as authorized by the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3711A of the Code of Virginia under subsection 8 for the consultation of legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel.
Second.
Can we get a roll call?
Dr. Acuff?
Yes.
Mr. Alcarro?
Yes.
Dr. Berlin?
Yes.
Ms. Lee?
Yes.
Ms. Osborne?
Yes.
Mr. Page?
Yes.
Chair Carlson?
Yes.
So moved.
Great. For those in the audience who maybe don't regularly attend, there is no anticipated motion out of this meeting, and it is going to be about 15 minutes, and so you feel free to leave if you want. We're going to come out and make our certification. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Alcarro?
Yes.
Dr. Berlin?
Yes.
Ms. Lee?
Yes.
Ms. Osborne?
Yes.
Dr. Acuff?
Yes.
Mr. Page?
Yes.
Chair Carlson?
Yes.
So moved.
Awesome, thank you guys, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Not even, oh, you had to adjourn us.
Oh, sorry. Meeting adjourned.
You're going out that way?
And Rob?
Yes, sir.
I don't want
like a
everybody to
Reader's
touch them,
Digest
'cause
version
I
of some
touched
of
them, and
those
I'm
books